Alright, this is the Creating Better Arguments video. So this video is going to be the most important video that I produce throughout the semester. Creating Better Arguments is one of the major focuses of this course. It is something that we're going to work on continuously, and it's a skill that I want you to build in this course and take with you for the rest of your life. Now, with regard to creating arguments and how to get better at it, there's going to be four major sources of guidance. The first source of guidance is the Excel grading sheet. So this Excel grading sheet is going to be in your reading packet. It'll be emailed to you, and it's going to be given back to you at the end of each short assignment, each written assignment, each argument assignment that you do. Now, on the Excel grading sheet, there's a number of categories. You're going to be graded on those categories individually, and the average of those categories, plus and minus some supplements at the bottom, will constitute your grade. And that's going to be a major source of feedback because it's going to tell you where you've gone wrong and what you've done right. Another major source of guidance is the grading rubric. And so the grading rubric is found in your reading packets, and essentially what it does, now this one is written on a little bit, but it's going to take you through each of the components of creating a better argument. So thesis, transitions, citations, objections and rebuttals, length and accuracy, and then the supplements in terms of being late, lack of depth, phrasing, grammar, and creativity. So that's going to give you more precise, a little bit fuller feedback in terms of where you've gone wrong, and again, what you've done right. Both components. And you can refer to that if you're unsure about what to do, about what is expected. A third major source of guidance is this video. You'll be watching this video at the outset of the course, but also refer it back to you at a number of points in the course, specifically regarding quizzes and exams. So in this video, I'm going to take you through all the elements of what it means to create a good argument, what my expectations are, and again, like the grading rubric in the reading packet, this is something you can refer back to at any time. Use this as a resource. It's a good one. And finally, the fourth resource is me. Either during office hours or over email conversations or after class or anything like that, I encourage you to talk with me about your arguments. I encourage you to talk with me if you have any problem with it, if you have any kind of dispute, or if you simply want to talk about how to improve. You can talk about what you did well. So I'm here, I'm a resource, and I definitely want you to use that resource like the other three. Alright, so then why? Why do I focus on creating better arguments? What's the point? Well, the point is that it is, as I mentioned before, it's a skill that can remain with you for the rest of your life. It is a skill that doesn't go away once you master it, once you internalize some of these basic components. Now, when you talk about a skill like this, it's unlike particular concepts or particular ideas that you may learn in a particular class, but then you're going to forget. The reality is that 90-95% of the individual ideas and concepts that we learn in any particular class, we're going to forget. You know, and I'm a philosophy major. I got my PhD in philosophy. But if I went back to my undergrad and was asked to recall specific concepts or specific ideas, I'd be very hard-pressed to do so. It's because we forget that kind of stuff. But what we do remember are habits, are skills, ways to approach ideas, ways to approach reading, ways to approach writing, ways to approach arguing, and that's really what I want you to leave you with. And one of the other reasons I want you to get this, and I want to work on this with you, is because it's applicable to anything that you do. In most any class that you take in college, your ability to create an argument and your ability to understand an argument is going to help you. Your ability to write or your ability to speak well is going to be an asset to you. Again, in most any course that you take in college. But it's also applicable to any career that you would get after college, whether it be a nurse, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a business person, whether it be a public administrator. Whatever you go into, There's going to come a point in your career where you're going to have to make an argument for your position. There's going to come a point where you have to convince others that your idea is the right idea. And your ability to do that is going to be fostered by working on it in college and working on it in this class. And so this creating arguments is not a skill that's specific to an English class or a philosophy class. This is a skill that applies to everything. And that's one of the reasons, one of the main reasons that I really want to work on this with you. The other reality is that the contemporary generation of students, you guys, tend to not be very good at this. You tend to struggle when it comes to putting together a full, coherent argument. And so if you can master this skill, then this is something that is going to make you stand out. So when you come out of this course, having worked on creating a better argument, you're going to come out of this course and out of your college career, hopefully, being able to be distinct, be recognizable, because employers are going to say, wow, this person can write, or this person can speak well, this person can make their points. And when you look at career surveys or employer surveys, oftentimes what these surveys say is that what they want out of college kids is they want them to be able to read, they want them to be able to critically think, and that not enough college students do that. So if you are able to do that, then you get a leg up. And finally, wherever you're at, maybe you are really good at creating an argument, but you can always improve. And if you're really poor, then we're going to work on getting you better. So if you start low, we're going to work on getting you a little bit higher. And if you start high, we're going to work on getting you higher. And that applies to anyone, even myself. As a professional philosopher, I have to work on creating arguments, and I can continuously get better. And so it's a skill that wherever you're at, you can improve. So I don't do it to make your life difficult. I do it because it is important. Okay, now when we talk about the grading breakdown sheet, and again, that's this Excel sheet right here. What is the purpose of the sheet? Well, the purpose of the sheet is to highlight your strengths as well as your weaknesses. It's both. I want to show you what you're doing well, and I also want to show you what you're doing poorly. And I want to show you in very specific terms rather than very general terms. And we're going to get into those specific elements of creating an argument in a short bit, but it's meant to give you as specific feedback as possible on both your strengths and your weaknesses. And so there's four major categories, so thesis, citations, transitions, use of objections, and rebuttals. And within those four categories, they're broken down into four subcategories that, again, is meant to give you as specific feedback as possible. And I'm going to grade those categories in terms of a Y, a P, or an N. So if you get a Y in one of those subcategories, essentially what it means is that you accomplished that fully or almost completely fully. You would get 25 points or 20 points, and that would add up, if you get Ys in all of them, to 100 points. The Ps tend to be between 5 and 20 points, and the P means partially. You've accomplished some part of that, or you've started to accomplish that component of the grading category. And finally, Ns, which would be anywhere from 0 to 5 points, would mean that you haven't accomplished that particular component, and it's something that you really need to work on. Now, the supplement areas, the supplement section, these are areas where you can gain or lose points. So, for example, creativity. If your essay is very creative, you would gain points. If your phrasing and grammar is poor, you would lose points. And same thing with lack of depth. And then the final point I want to mention, in order to guide you, in order to help you, is that when I grade your short assignments, I want to, again, give you as much feedback as possible. So I'll often do that through abbreviations. And so the abbreviation sheet in your reading packet can also be a resource to you. All right, so now I want to get into the different components, and I want to kind of take you through those components and give you as full a sense as possible as to what is expected and tips on how to do well. Okay, so your thesis. Your thesis, what that means, that is your basic point. That is the basic goal that you are trying to reach. That is what you want to accomplish as a writer or a speaker, because you can do these short assignments in either written or video form. It is the most important element of your argument. everything comes back to the thesis. And again, I want to really stress this. The most important element of your argument is your thesis. Everything is affected by your thesis. And a good, strong thesis will make it much easier to create a good argument, and a very poor thesis will make it much more difficult to create a good argument. So everything is affected. You're able to transition better when you know exactly what you want to talk about. You're able to identify relevant versus irrelevant quotes much more effectively when you have a strong thesis and you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. You're able to make an objection much more effectively when you know exactly and specifically what you want to object to. And the other element here in terms of a good thesis is that it helps not only the reader or the viewer of your argument, it helps you. Oftentimes students struggle to identify and understand what it exactly is that they're talking about, what exactly it is that they're trying to accomplish. And so if you have a good, strong thesis, then it's much more clear, both to the reader or viewer, but also you, as to what you want to accomplish. And that helps you, again, in every element of your argument. Okay, so now when we talk about the individual subcategories, and again, you can refer to this Excel sheet. The first one is, did the essay have a point or a goal or a thesis? And the first question you want to ask yourself is, did it have a goal at all? Was there a point? Or was it just a kind of a rambling collection of thoughts? And even if you think it does have a point, you have to ask yourself, would that point be identifiable to a reader or to a viewer who isn't inside your head, who doesn't know the arguments and your intentions like you do? And the second point, this is a closely related point, is the point or goal of the thesis clear? Could the reader easily identify that point or goal, or do they have to struggle for it? Do they have to try to figure it out? Do they have to kind of, think about many different options as a potential thesis for your arguments? Or do you clearly state it? Now, the other components, the subcategories, in terms of, was there more than one argument? Was it a fact versus an argument? If you struggle on that, likely you're going to also struggle on this component. You want to have a single thesis. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then finally, kind of another tip in terms of just creating an identifiable thesis is to use the phrase, in this essay, I will. Now, there's competing theories about first-person pronouns, and some people say do it, other people say don't. There is no consensus, I can tell you that, in terms of higher academia. But the reason I like that phrase, in this essay I will, is because it forces you, as the writer or speaker of your argument, to identify it, to acknowledge to yourself, okay, here is what I want to accomplish. This is what I'm going to do in this essay. And then it also identifies for the viewer or the reader what it is that you want to accomplish. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that phrase, in this essay I will. Use it. It'll help you. Okay, the second subcategory is the point or the goal of the essay nuanced. So nuanced essentially means going beyond the obvious or beyond the superficial. Nuanced means that you're getting into the details. So a nuanced paper is one that is filled with a focused examination of a specific topic, and that focused examination forces you to get into very specific details that you might not otherwise in an overly broad topic. Now, a good way to kind of ask yourself whether you have a specific nuanced thesis statement is to not simply state, here's what I'm going to do, but to give a reason as to why, a specific reason as to why you think you are going to accomplish your goal. So, for example, and this comes from the grading rubric, if your thesis is that you will argue that human beings are good, that's superficial. That can go in many different directions. That's not detailed. That's not specific. Because you could argue that human beings are good in a whole host of ways, many, many different ways. But if you argue that human beings are good because they're created by an all-loving God who remains present in the human beings despite sin, then this is more nuanced. This is a very specific reason that you are going to argue that human beings are good. And a good tip, this is a tip, a good way to check to see whether your thesis is nuanced and specific is to ask yourself whether it feels so specific that you're going to struggle to get 2 pages out of it, or you're going to struggle to get 6 minutes out of it. It should feel like you're going to struggle. It should feel so specific that you at first ask yourself, well, how can I actually make a 2-page argument or a 6 minutes video? That feeling of specificity forces you to get into the details. The next component, next subcategory, only one major argument must be developed. So is there a single specific point that you're attempting to prove, or are there multiple main ideas that could potentially be a thesis, that could potentially be a central argument? So you want to avoid saying, I'm going to argue that human beings are good for these 3 reasons. You want one reason. One specific reason you are going to argue for your thesis. Again, if there's multiple kind of points, your grade is going to be lower. Multiple potential kind of points, your grade will be lower. Okay, the thesis is an argument, not a description of the fact. If you are simply stating something as a fact, then there's no reason to make an argument for it. There's no reason to offer evidence, there's no reason to offer an objection, there's no reason to offer a rebuttal. This is, in this course, you're making arguments. And so if you state something as a fact, that's not going to work for this component. So as an example, if you say that human beings are good, then you communicate to the reader this is a fact. If they simply are good, then there's no argument to be made. But if you state that human beings, you're going to argue that human beings are good, or that you're going to prove human beings are good, then that is an argument, because you're stating there is an opposite side, there is an opposing point of view. Final tip with regard to thesis, make sure that there's consistency in your first paragraph. Make sure that the ideas in your opening paragraph are consistent with your thesis or related to that thesis. Sometimes students will have a thesis that comes out of the blue, that's not connected to what went before it, or in even worse cases, that contradicts what went before it. So this is a big mistake that students make. Make sure that your ideas are consistent. And this goes to the next major component of creating a better argument, transitions. And the first one is, did the ideas flow together? And I want you to think of yourself in terms of being a guide rather than an explorer. An explorer goes in uncharted territory and is kind of looking around and trying to figure out what's happening and not sure what this new place is and not sure where he or she is going. An explorer that is making an argument is kind of throwing out ideas and is unsure about where they're going. And that's okay in a draft. But when it comes to the final essay, you want to be a guide. You want to be showing the reader or the viewer where your arguments are going. You want to be showing the reader or the viewer how your ideas are connected to each other and how they're connected back to the major thesis. So flow, what does that mean? Well, flow means that there's a central argument or theme around which all the ideas are centering, versus having kind of multiple competing major ideas. Finally, another element of flow is, do your paragraphs relate to one another? Is there a reason that one paragraph comes after the next? Or are these paragraphs kind of independent ideas that may be all good in their own respect and in their own light, but that don't work together as a whole? Flow also means that you're going to avoid contradictory statements or ideas. It means that you don't say something is good in one paragraph and then say that it is bad in another. That is a contradictory idea, and that confuses the reader or viewer, because they're trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is this person saying? What are they trying to get at? Because contradictory statements, that disrupts the flow, because the reader just has to stop and think and say, okay, what is the point here? Or they have to kind of try to figure out, okay, here's how the author is trying to connect back to their major argument. So avoid those contradictions. Finally, flow is going to be greatly enhanced by transition words. And in your Creating Arguments rubric, I've given you a website that links you up to a set of transition words that organizes them by category. It's a very, very helpful site. There's many sites like it. So this is just one example, but use those words. If you're not using those words by the same token, likely your flow is not going to be the best. Okay, the next category, did the ideas in the argument consistently refer back to the thesis? So again, the most important element of any good argument is a thesis. If your ideas are not related to your thesis, if they're not helping you develop your thesis, then they are irrelevant. They should not be part of your essay. Get rid of them. They're not helping you in this particular argument. They may be great ideas, but every idea in this essay should help you develop your argument. Now, helping you develop your argument doesn't simply mean using ideas that agree with you. I'm going to talk about the objections and rebuttals in a little bit. But you can also develop your arguments by having an objection, by having an opposing point of view. And as long as you communicate that clearly, you're good. So remember, in order to develop your thesis, you need ideas that support it, as well as ideas that challenge it. The next subcategory. Each paragraph had a central idea that was being developed. So, do the ideas or the points within each paragraph fit together? So if you are offering a paragraph that is evidence for your argument, it should be one specific piece of evidence that you explore fully, not multiple pieces of evidence within a single paragraph. Nor do you want to have a situation in which you have major separate ideas or concepts within a single paragraph. You know, for example, do you have a paragraph where you have some evidence for your thesis, then you have an objection, then you have a rebuttal, and those things are all kind of thrown into one paragraph together? That would be a major problem for this component of the grading rubric. What you want to have is each paragraph. You want to be able to kind of sum it up at the end of your essay and say, okay, this is what I was talking about in this paragraph. This was the major idea. This was the single thing I was trying to do. And as a general rule of thumb, are there 3 or more paragraphs with distinctly different components of the argument are being offered? If so, then you're going to get an N for this component. And again, a common example of distinctly different ideas within a single paragraph would be something like offering the objection and rebuttal in a single paragraph, or giving evidence for your argument and then offering an objection in a single paragraph. If you have something like I mentioned above, you're offering evidence, but you're offering kind of multiple pieces of evidence with the same paragraph, that's not as bad, but that's still not focused on a single idea, and so you would get partial credit in that regard. And cumulatively, if there's enough of these mistakes, then you would get an N. The author proposed an objection and rebuttal. One of the biggest mistakes the students make when creating an argument is that they don't introduce an objection as an objection. So the objection is going to be a disagreement with your point of view. You have to offer that as an objection, using phrases such as, some may argue, or an opposing point of view would say, or taking the opposite position. On the other hand, all these phrases are ways to introduce an objection, and if you do that, then you're in good hands. If you don't clearly identify an objection as an objection or a rebuttal as a rebuttal, then oftentimes what happens is that you end up seeming to make contradictory claims. You seem to be saying one thing in one paragraph and something different in another paragraph. Okay, very good. So citations. Okay, so with citations, the next major category in the argument, this is important because it allows you, using citations, allows you to interpret and connect your ideas with that of another, and another source that is most likely an expert. A source that comes from someone who has thought about this issue, who's reflected on it, who has something meaningful to say about it. Whether you agree or disagree with it is secondary. So the conversation here is with this source, and then you can take this source and say either I agree with it or I don't agree with it. And so it promotes, using quotes, an exploration of your ideas. And it also demonstrates understanding. It demonstrates that you understand what is being said in the text. And so I always think of the image as a conversation. Citations should be like having a conversation with the class material, whether it be the class books, the class videos, or the class lectures. The first subcategory, the argument used at least 3 quotes. Now, this is very important. Just because you have 3 quotes doesn't mean you're going to get full credit for the citation section of your grading analysis, of your grading argument. Because if you use 3 quotes other than class material, then that would get you full credit for, or potentially full credit for this first section, but not the second subcategory. In other words, I want to give you credit if you use outside sources, Wikipedia, or whatever source it is that you're using. And I encourage you to use outside sources. That's great. That's wonderful. That means you're engaged with things other than simply the class material, and you're bringing them together, and I think that is wonderful. I think that's beautiful. But if you just use outside sources, you're not going to get full credits. To get full credits, another element that you need to use is to use at least 3 sources, at least 3 quotes from the class material, whether that be class video or class text. Class discussions or class emails would not count as official class material. Again, you can reference them, but it wouldn't count as official class material. What you're assigned to read and what you're assigned to watch, or the videos that we watch in class, those would be official class material. Now, I also want to be clear about this. If you use 3 quotes from the class material, you don't then have to use 3 quotes from outside sources. 3 quotes from class material would count as for both of the first 2 subcategories. Okay. The third subcategory, quotes were relevant to the argument. So it is your responsibility as an author to show how your views are supported or challenged by the quote that you use. So if quotes neither support your argument nor contest it, then you're not using a relevant quote. And again, quotes don't always have to be support. They don't always have to show how your argument is correct. Quotes can be used in the form of an objection. Quotes can be used to challenge your thesis. And in fact, that is really effective, and that's wonderful. Because if you're able to quote somebody that disagrees with you, an expert that disagrees with you, and then show how they're wrong, then you have really done something persuasive in terms of your essay. And this is important, don't assume that your quote says it all. I want you to show the reader or the viewer how your quote fits into your argument. Explain your quote. Show how it's relevant. And that's going to allow you to develop further depth in your own argument, your own understanding. If you use quotes that are purely definitional, like you're talking about utilitarianism and you quote the definition of utilitarianism, certainly that's relevant, but I'm not going to give you full credit for the relevancy section of this subcategory, simply because I want your quotes, at least some of your quotes, to really further develop your argument in interesting ways. A definitional quote is good, it's useful, but it doesn't necessarily help you develop your argument in new or interesting or intriguing ways. Okay, the fourth subcategory is, did the author properly quote? Now, I am not a stickler, I'm not going to be overly focused on the particular style, but I do want it to be evident that you are quoting. And if you are using quotation marks, that's the key, that's the big thing. That indicates that you're not paragraph phrasing, you're pulling from word from a particular text or video. Paraphrasing does not count as quoting. Let me be clear about that. If you are paraphrasing, you will get a 0 for the citation section of your grade. You have to quote. You have to pull the exact words from the text or the video that you're referring to. And quotation marks tell the reader explicitly, this is not my own material. These are not my own words. They're coming from somewhere else. And so use quotation marks. That's key. You should also reference the source. Did it come from a book? And what page number? The particular style, again, I'm not overly focused on, I'm not overly concerned with, but I want it to be evidence that this is a quote, and I want it to be evident where it came from. Okay. Use of objection and rebuttal. This is the area where students tend to struggle the most. This is where they tend to have the biggest problems. And to describe an objection and rebuttal, I often use a sports analogy. So think of it like you're playing a sport, you're playing a game. And the goal of almost any game is to score. You want to put the ball in the nets, or the ball in the hoop, the puck in the nets. You want to kick the ball into the goal. You want to place the football, you want to cross the football over the goal line, so on and so forth. As the offense, you're trying to score. And the evidence and the arguments that you offer on behalf of your thesis are kind of like you being the offense. You trying to score. You trying to show the reader or the viewer, here's why my point is right. Now, objections are disagreements. Objections occur when you make a statement that disagrees with your point of view, that attempts to show how your point of view, your thesis, is wrong. Now, in the sports analogy, objections would be akin to the defense. The defense is trying to stop the offense from scoring. The defense doesn't want them to score, and in the argument, the defense is trying to stop you from making your point effectively. It's trying to say, here's why your point is wrong. But then, like any good offense, they have to react to the defense. They have to counterattack. They have to adjust.